Good evening, dear friends. As I understand, we're tired, so I have reformatted my report a little bit. It is going to be called A Brief History of Liberal Russia in Images. For our foreign guests, to understand what is implied here, all our older generation had only one textbook called The Brief History of Communist Party. And funny pictures, it's something we saw at kindergarten level. So let's see the images. For our foreign guests mainly, I say this. The parties were not an exclusive part of election process. The law on parties was enacted only 2001. Before that, that was called electoral associations, and the Constitution doesn't mention parties. Why do I start from 1993? Because 1993, where the Constitution was adopted, and it was the year, and together with the referendum on the Constitution, we had first elections. It was many people and parties participated, but since 1993 to 2003, we're dealing with two institutionalized liberal forces. They changed names, while the Union of Right Forces, then initially Choice of Russia, then Democratic Choice of Russia, and Yabloko also changed names over time. The positions are different. One party is market liberals without a social element, and we are with a social element and with the criticism of oligarchic system. The Union of Right Forces, it did support Yeltsin and initially supported Putin. We were always in opposition. There were other parties, I will not name those all, but in all those electoral cycles they got very small percentage of votes. Then there was reformatting, replanning of parties, and instead of a big amount of parties, it was 43 electoral associations that could participate in elections, very many. But the rights were rewritten. Like often happens in this country, only 7 parties remained after that. These 7 parties, they were 4 parliamentary parties and 3 non-parliamentary parties. 2003, Yabloko and the Union of Right Forces were not elected to the Duma, and one of the previous slides shows that. In 2007, there was a catastrophe. Very difficult to recover after that. You see the results. Yabloko received less than 2%, 1.5%, and SPS, Union of Right Forces, got less than 1%. But the destiny is different. All the time before, the main theme in the interaction between SPS and Yabloko was potential unification that was discussed by people outside the party, by journalists, politologists, and inside our parties. And the mainstream was that the most common opinions was let's unify, get together, and we'll get more votes. But Yabloko decided against that. So Yabloko is still alive, and the SPS no longer that. After 2007, a new situation emerged. First, because the spectrum was very narrow, only 7 parties. As a result, informal parties appeared on the one hand, and a tendency appeared, and the desire appeared to unify the opposition into a single party. And those attempts to unify, unfortunately, were not successful. In addition to that, artificial parties appeared, created from top. They were on all areas of the political spectrum. In our part of the political spectrum, it was the Pravo Delo, the right cause, based on the ruins of the Union of Right Forces. It was an artificial party controlled by the Kremlin. And well, it still participates in elections, but the influence is minimal, and they do support Kremlin. What did the authorities do with civic organizations? They suppressed them. On the other hand, they wanted to bring those onto our side. 2 attempts at civic forum when the authorities would sit together with our defendants of human rights, but that ended up in arrests, detainments, and suppression by law enforcement agencies. Now, how did the opposition try to unite? There's a whole story behind that, a long story, a lot of paper, a lot of hours in discussion, maybe even days and months in discussion of how to unify it. Yes, the story was long, but the result was clear. It failed. Individual democratic forces, the whole of opposition tried to unite democratic and non-democratic, but it didn't result in anything. It started after 2003, and all those associations broke up. There were exotic ones. Here we see Garry Kasparov, a well-known liberal, although his citizenship now is in Latvia, right? And here, Eduard Limonov, national Bolshevik, one of the more active players in the field, and who support Putin very much. And Kasyana, former prime minister under Yeltsin, well, there was another image together with Limonov. Exotic unions, that didn't bring anything. In parallel, another phenomenon evolved. Vorozhekina mentioned that new forms of activity of citizens, they grew from simple things like protect your park, protect your yard, protect against development, but that was under the surface for a long time. They emerged over the surface after 2011. And the biggest out of those associations was summer meeting to protect the Khimki forest. It was 5,000 people gathering in the center of Moscow. The precursor of those bigger events. And fully controlled party system, this image shows, and starting 2003, liberal forces were ousted out of the legal field. Yabloko continues to be the only legal force that was registered and was able to participate in elections. Practically, the process was marginalizing the opposition. It was not possible to create a new party until 2011. This country stayed with 7 parties until then, and so all other forces went into informal. So there's a second dilemma here. After a discussion between Yabloko and SPS, informal parties, what to do, to unite or not to unite, especially considering the positions are different. And this was a confusion, an ideological confusion, and it turned out that the people who called themselves liberal or formal liberal or modern liberal, while they did populism and they did accept nationalism. So, the activities were different. That's a typical one. Company in the center, Evgeny Chirikova, the defender of Khimki Forest. To the right is former vice president in the government of Yeltsin, Nemtsov, and to the left is extreme left Udaltsov, who's now in jail, isn't he? Or is still under home arrest. Oh, a company like this. Or upper picture, also typical for that time. Limonov, whom I mentioned, national Bolshevik, nearby our well-known protector of human rights, chairman of the Helsinki group, Lyudmila Alexeyeva, and Vasily Barshov, the co-chair of our human rights faction. And below, also other companies, Bogdanov, political technologist, chairman of Democratic Party for some time. Well, he's still on stage. Person who builds parties on a turnkey basis. It's worth 260,000 euros. You just place an order and you'll get a party. But the names of the parties are normally democratic, and that breeds confusion among the people. After the elections of 2011, the situation did change. The trigger for the change, those major demonstrations, were not actually the results of the elections. It was that before the elections, the people were cheated and said that the president and prime minister would change places. Who was president would become prime minister, etc. People were disappointed. Well, do ask us before you do anything like that. But when the results of the elections, it turned out, were falsified, there were many observers, they saw it with their own eyes. After that, people took to the streets. The posters that here were going to observe. And then there was a series of major demonstrations, meetings, rallies, starting after 1989. It took various forms, symbols, white ribbons, poles, occupy until you're dispersed, etc. But these were always protests without clear political position. All people would carry white ribbons altogether, tried to set up a coordinating committee for the opposition. Everybody was there, nationalists, communists, liberals, but we did not join, and didn't work out. And the results, it couldn't be converted in political success, neither for other part of opposition, neither us. But then what happened was the Crimea. And immediately after the elections, the authorities would allow more parties, breeding even more confusion. On the other hand, that started adopting repressive laws. They imposed more restrictions in the laws. There was 76 parties at that point in time, so there are more restrictions on the number of parties. The intent, of course, as we see in the government, to get back to the previous situation, not 7 parties, maybe 10 to 15. It's now 69 parties that have the right to participate in elections, out of which democratic ones are Yabloko. We have factions in 3 regions right now, more than 30 regions where we have deputies at local level. RPR Parnas, in the recent elections, they didn't participate. Civic Platform, break him up right now because Prof has left, and that was artificial party. The Civic Force, hardly known, and Civic Initiative, also hardly known. Democratic Choice, also on that threshold between nationalism and liberalism. And some party projects there are, and the number of liberal parties still have not been registered. They continue to be informal. The only positive experience of recent time, despite the pressure, despite all the difficulties, that was experience of elections to Moscow Duma, mentioned today already. To add to what has been said, from Yabloko, 1/4 of the candidates representing our party were from other political forces, normally liberal forces. And while I'm concluding here, as is requested by the chairman, the objectives of liberal forces, more difficult to achieve right now. Our objectives is to clearly state our position on the European alternative and our adherence to liberal norms. That includes all set of issues associated with Ukraine. The Moscow elections show that we do have some support. Well, while we have a memorandum, some didn't sign. You have those in your folders. For this, we need to address active citizens and civil society. We should be looking for allies in informal parties. We should continue participating in elections, and we should have succession plans for our personnel. We need a program of priority reforms in a situation when the regime suddenly changes. Thank you.